He was getting set to write about Connor Noland, and so there's a little football, a little baseball going in at the same time, and then Connor Noland goes out and made it a very prescient article as we bring Connor O'Gara from Saturday Down South on to halftime here. This is quite a list for Connor Noland to join. Todd Helton from Tennessee, Jeff Granger from Texas A&M, and James Street, who Razorback fans know quite well, are the only players, along now with Connor Noland, to ever win a game in college as a starting quarterback and a pitcher in the College World Series. Connor, that is quite a list to join.
I mean, let's also think about the fact that he won a game as a Chad Morris quarterback. I don't think any of those guys could have done that. You know, that's got to count for, like, probably more than winning in Omaha, I would say. I mean, that's just an unbelievable list to join. Look, like, I know everybody in Arkansas has been talking about this for a really long time. Every time he takes a bump, like, it's well documented. It's still pretty amazing to think about what he's been able to do at Arkansas. And Phil, you've had a chance to be able to kind of see this up close in the way that it's played out over the course of the last few weeks with him, you know, truly dialing into being this ace. But, you know, to think that he went from being a guy that Arkansas fans were hopeful could be the answer at quarterback when there were no answers whatsoever, to now being in this role in an entirely different sport, albeit his better sport, I mean, let's call it what it is no small feat. And the athleticism of Connor Noland to pull that off, I mean, it's unbelievable. And I tip my cap to somebody who has just shown up and continued to be exactly what that team needs right now.
It's amazing. You got to be careful with, like, the baseball versus football comparisons because they're totally different sports. But it was kind of like the game he pitched yesterday was almost like handing it off a bunch of times to your teammate, to your running backs, and letting them show what they can do. Because his strength yesterday was the ground ball, and that's Arkansas's main strength defensively. It's just he's such a good match for this team. So I want to ask you, too, you wrote about before the College World Series started, you didn't know who the favorite was going to be. I don't think anybody had an idea who the favorite was going to be after Tennessee got knocked out. You know, you haven't quite played through that first set of games to see who's 2-0. Oklahoma feels like a front runner now on the other side. Do you have a sense of what you might see tonight and who you think could be a favorite tonight?
Oklahoma and Arkansas look like the favorites, in my opinion. And, you know, I think it's a little bit easier to say that about Oklahoma, but, man, watching the way they just jumped all over A&M, I mean, that was like, whew, like before the clock hit, you know, before it was an hour into that game, it was already 8-0. Like, this lineup just does not mess around. I mean, they will make you pay for those mistakes. And so, like, I think Oklahoma right now probably would be the national pick. But I don't know. Do you want to play Arkansas at this point? Do you want to play a team that's able to put up runs in a hurry like that as well? I mean, we knew that offense was probably going to be on display in a different way, given the historic pace of the home run already in the NCAA tournament. You know, it's changed, obviously, in Omaha. It's no longer this place where, you know, balls kind of go to die. It still can on any given day. But I think, you know, we saw with Texas, just because you have the big bats doesn't necessarily mean that you're destined to all of a sudden take over in Omaha. You still got to be able to put balls in play and have that timely hitting. In Arkansas right now, I mean, they have it in spades. I'd say Arkansas and Oklahoma, the way that they're heading, this feels like those two would be the obvious picks, just because A&M is still going to have a really tough task ahead if they want to kind of get back there. But obviously what they were able to do to Texas certainly put some people on notice.
Mm-hmm. Well, Connor, I want to go back to Connor Noland real quick and kind of just how unique his story really is, especially in today's college athletics. It's getting to be a little rare, but not as rare as it is for other sports, for you to have quarterbacks that are D1 talented, that are also great pitchers, you know, and we're starting to see more and more of kids choosing, you know, picking which sport they want to do earlier and earlier nowadays. But the thing that makes his story, I think, more unique, especially with the way the transfer portal really has evolved over the last few years, how many more guys do you think that it could actually would be able to do what Connor Noland has done, not only go from being a starting quarterback to not playing football to playing baseball to being somewhat of a not an ace, not really the guy that everybody wants the ball in his hand, to stick it out and to be where he is right now. Is Connor Noland, is that really just a dying breed, especially with the way the portal is working out, that we're not going to see stories really like this going forward?
Yeah, I think it'll be less and less, not just because of the desire of the player, but because of what these programs demand. I mean, with the way that spring football is set up, and, one of the things that Connor Noland talked about, his reasoning for not wanting to continue football, the conversation that he had with Bo Mattingly on the Hog Pod, which was a great listen. You can go listen to it on it's literally on his bio page on the official Arkansas website, is he felt behind every time he came back to spring football. You go do all your baseball stuff, and then you come back to spring football, and you feel like you're just kind of looking up at it. And at quarterback, you just kind of can't really be in that spot. Now, some would probably look at a situation like that and say, well, I wonder how much of it was this impossible, complicated Chad Morris offense to figure out, and if he had been in a different system, if that could have benefited him more. I don't really know. But I think there is such a demand on these guys year-round to where it's not a guarantee that everybody's going to totally sign off on this. I know Arkansas has been pretty vocal about wanting to support that endeavor, and a school like Ole Miss has been another one. I know with Taiwan Malone, a guy who's getting Frank Thomas comparisons for what he's going to be able to do possibly as a defensive lineman for them, and also can hit the baseball a mile. I mean, I think that's a guy who, you hear about these cases, but to be a quarterback and to also be a starting pitcher is extremely difficult. Of course, we've seen the Jameis Winstons of the world who have made that look easy, but I don't know. I just think that it's not a given that teams are going to totally sign off on this and be okay with it. And, maybe they will early on, and that's just kind of a recruiting tactic. But once you actually get there and have to go through with it, it is really difficult. And, Connor Noland found that out, and he made a decision that ultimately was better for him. But, I think that's a really challenging thing to pursue, and anybody that is able to manage their time well enough to do that for any amount of time, to me, is impressive in itself.
Mm-hmm. And now, Connor, I've been wanting to ask you about this last couple of weeks, because I've been following what y'all been doing on Saturday Down South with y'all's launch mode articles. You had a 4-part series on softball and kind of the evolution, where it's going in today's America. And I think it's something our audience is definitely interested in, because Arkansas softball is starting to become larger and larger as Courtney Deifel and her team keeps getting better and better. Do you think softball is kind of on the edge of possibly rivaling women's basketball as the most popular women's sport in America? I mean, is it getting close?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a huge rise in popularity, and the home run helps. I mean, right, like that. Once you establish kind of that element, I think from an entertainment standpoint, it makes the product more interesting to consume. And you look at what Oklahoma did this past year, that certainly helps the sport with the Jocelyn Allo and what they're able to kind of do on the national stage, where they're doing this on ESPN, and everybody's kind of seeing like, wow, the balls are flying out of the yard. And it's just a different game than it was 10, 15 years ago, and we're seeing home runs hit at a more frequent pace, not so much just based on moving runners from station to station. And that's what's going to sell. I mean, I've always thought that. I mean, I remember covering college softball back in 2009 in Indiana, and just being amazed as that was my first real exposure to the sport on an everyday basis. But just how much of it was station to station, I was like, you know what? Like, it feels like there could be a different way to go about this, and I don't know if that's going to change. I've kind of wondered if they're going to change, some of the dimensions as well to make it more fair for pitchers. If they're going to do that with how much the home run has really risen in the past decade. But I think that we're going to continue to see a sport that's rising that will definitely rival college basketball, women's college basketball, and have a shelf life. And there's definitely a national audience for it. And if they continue to hit home runs like this, I mean, yeah, there's no doubt about it. It absolutely sells.
So, Connor, it looks like we might have a little bit of an idea of windows for players to join new football teams finally. It looks like the Coaches Association was able to convince the Transformation Committee about transfer portal windows. So what are we looking at? It looks like as long as this gets passed, and it probably does get passed, we're looking at a couple of weeks at the end of the season, a couple of weeks after spring football. And this should help coaches have a sense of what their rosters will look like.
Yeah, you need that. I absolutely think that it makes a lot of sense to have that window. Just because you don't want to be having those conversations in the middle of the season. Now, I think you still could see situations in which it's understood that someone is going to be entering the transfer portal and they're going to maintain their eligibility. Let's also not forget about the 4-game redshirt rule. And if we see guys who are kind of abiding by that, and it's kind of this agreement of, hey, I'm going to be sitting out the rest of the year because I want to maintain a year of eligibility and do this, help me out. I think we'll still see situations like that, and that'll still be frustrating for coaches. But, yeah, I think seeing these windows is a sign of progress and is a sign that the sport is going to have some sort of enforceable rules. The coaches wanted this. That's the biggest thing. The coaches didn't want to have to deal with this headache year-round. They didn't want to feel like they were having to manage rosters during the season or having to worry about what happens if I put this kid on the depth chart here or there. Having this window, everybody can kind of go all in with it, and it's understood. To me, it makes a lot of sense, but, it's just part of this ever-evolving process that we're still kind of getting used to. And I think that it'll make coaches a little bit more active, a little bit more aware and supportive, kind of this new era of college football.
Yeah, it's just a little feeling that the Wild Wild West might get tamed sometime in the next century or so.
Partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find all the latest sports developments, including updated odds on the NBA playoffs, fights, and even next season's futures. And don't forget that the MLB is back as well. Who are you picking to win the World Series? BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino and poker games. It's super easy to get started. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to join and use our promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online, where the game starts.